Okay. That might work. All right. Sweet. Can you hear me okay? Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. All right. Cool. Well, welcome everybody. Excuse me. To the Slack group. It's apparently December is not a great month to do these. I guess I should have taken December off, but I actually asked for some swag today. I was going to do a drawing, but you get it. So I'll go find out what they left me and we'll just make it happen. So that's cool. So today we're going to talk about .NET 9 and specifically some of the things that it brings to Azure. Whoops. Now, obviously, .NET 9, there's a lot of stuff there, right? And so there's a couple of things I want to hit on. Dallin did a really good brown bag recently about some of the stuff that we're going to hit on today. So if I say anything wrong, I know that you'll help me out. So, oh, I do that all the time. So anyway, I always like to tell people who I am, but I think everybody here already knows me, so we're not going to waste time on that. So my tech tip of the day. So this is something that's completely unrelated to programming, but I was really intrigued by it. Your plastic pal who's fun to be with. Does anybody know where that comes from? Looks like the Jetsons. No. Okay, that's a little disappointing. Nobody even knows what that is. Wow. Okay. Has anybody ever read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Okay. No, it doesn't at all. It doesn't even close to count. Let's see. Where's my notes? The screen's not big enough. Hold on. I have a. So, has anybody? Where? Oh wait. Well, somebody said Hitchhikers. Hey, all right. So somebody knows at least. All right. Let me see if I can. Oh, here it is. Okay. So this is Tesla's Optimus robot. I mean, watch this thing. Isn't this amazing? And then there's a funny part here that I always like to watch. So this is a demo that they were doing recently. Have you guys ever heard of Optimus, the robot? So this is going to be their assistant robot that they're going to sell to everybody. And watch this. Did you see that? He slipped and recovered. If I would have done that, I'd have been on my butt like that. But the robot can recover. Anyway, I thought that was pretty amazing. So this is something that they're going to be selling. Now, Elon claims that it's going to cost between $20,000 and $30,000, but it'll be able to do everything that a human can do. And so that's pretty exciting. I'm kind of looking forward to that. I think that'll be kind of fun. Is it bound by the three laws? You know, that is actually a good question. And you know, you kind of, it's kind of silly, but that's actually a good question. I don't know. Although they did put in a restriction that it can only lift 80 pounds because they want to make sure that a human will be able to overpower it if necessary. But I was talking to my brother today, and I can just see a whole lot of a whole industry of mods being put out for these robots, right? You know, here's the flamethrower mod, here's the Gatling gun mod, here's how to jailbreak your robot. That's right. So anyway, I thought that was pretty cool. All right, so let's talk about .NET 9. Now, .NET 9, as you guys probably know, as I'm sure you know, is an STS release. That's short-term service, short-term support. But it is currently the best STS release that they have. So, and I think it's better than .NET 8, so it's even better than the LTS release. I think there's a lot of people that are hesitating to upgrade to it simply because of the STS. And honestly, if I had my way, I think Microsoft should just do LTS every year. I don't know why they have to do staggered STS releases. It's really frustrating, but if they could just do LTS every time, then people would upgrade because they're not going to be worried about it.
That is one of our worries.
But I was thinking about that, and the STS for .NET 9 expires in March. I think it's March of 2026, right? .NET 8 expires in November of 2026. So it's only like a 6-month difference anyway. And once .NET 10 comes out, you're going to upgrade to that anyway. So that's kind of my justification for upgrading everything to .NET 9. But whether it's valid or not, I don't know.
I'm excited for .NET 10 because it's a nice round.
Yeah, 10.
Yeah.
Windows 10 was really good, right? .NET 10 is going to be awesome. Well, some of the things that, well, first of all, I guess, did anybody want to do a lightning talk? No? Okay. Then never mind then. So a couple of things that we're going to talk about. So there's the new Microsoft.extensions.ai. That is an abstraction around using AI models. And it's really cool. It makes it super easy to use AI models. I built a proof of concept for a client today where they want to start integrating AI into their application. And so I just whipped something together. It took me longer to figure out how to use Blazor because that's been a while since I've done that than it did to actually do the AI stuff. So we're going to look a little bit at that. My absolute favorite thing in .NET as it relates to Azure today is .NET Aspire. Have you used .NET Aspire at all, Doug? No? Have you used it, Dylan? A little bit. So we're going to look at some .NET Aspire stuff. .NET 9 brings a lot to it, and I think .NET 9 really makes .NET Aspire ready to go for production. I feel comfortable. In fact, at STG, I'm going to make that the standard for anything that we deploy into Azure. Not just .NET apps either. We can do React apps, Angular apps, Vue apps, all kinds of things wrapped up in .NET Aspire. And we'll take a look at what I'm talking about when we get to that point.
So what is Aspire?
We'll talk about that and we'll hit it really hard. Yep. Because it'll blow you away. I can guarantee it. All right. .NET 9, every version of .NET, they really focus on performance. And every version of .NET gets faster and more efficient and better. .NET 9 is no different. And in fact, there's considerable performance improvements in .NET 9, and we'll touch on a couple of those. They've also focused a lot on security in .NET 9. They have some new libraries for cryptographic security and different things. They have, like in Aspire, Microsoft Entra is now default, and so it's going to handle all of that for you. So a lot of insecurity, and there's expanded paths support. What does that mean? Well, we'll talk about that when we get there. But that's one of the things that's been frustrating for me in the past is the delay in the support in some of the PaaS offerings up in Azure.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So you said Entra is the default in Aspire. Are they going to have good wizard to walk you through the setup, or because that's one of my frustrations.
Yeah.
Connecting your app to Entra.
Yeah.
And making sure you copy the connection string, or not the connection strings, the keys and everything the right way and put it in the right spot.
So that's the thing is with the integrations, Aspire, you shouldn't have to do hardly anything with connection strings unless you're reaching out to resources that already exist. But we'll look at that a little bit. They even have integrations for Key Vault. They have and .NET Aspire creates a managed identity for you that you can then connect to other resources. So it makes it a lot easier. Now, there's not a wizard per se. You kind of got to go into the code and you kind of got to configure it in there. But it's actually not that hard. And we'll look at a couple of things that I've played with recently. And there's a lot that I haven't even touched on with Aspire that I need to learn about. I actually went and tried to do the .NET Aspire technical skill thing, and I didn't even understand the first thing. It's like, well, what the crap is this? So I have to go figure it out a little bit more. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. All right, so let's take a look at Microsoft.extensions.ai. So let me bring up my AI demo. So what this does is this makes it super easy to use large language models in your code and to reach out to some of these large language models. So if we look at this, this is just a little quick AI demo that I put together. And it is literally this easy. So what you do is you create a chat client. After you reference the Microsoft.extensions.ai, and then you're also going to want to reference the Microsoft.extensions.ai.openai. Okay, so that's how you get into the OpenAI stuff, which is it's a NuGet package. Yep. And that's another thing. .NET 9 brings a lot of stability around NuGet packages, but we won't talk about any of that. But so yeah, so it's just a NuGet package, Microsoft.extensions.ai.openai, and you'll notice that they're currently in preview, but they should be out of preview soon. And right now they're really amazing. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a new OpenAI client, and you have to have an API key that you get from OpenAI. And I am not going to show you what my OpenAI key is because it costs money. And so I put it into an environment variable. And then you just come down here and you do a complete async and pass in a question or a chat prompt. And then what happens is it comes out and you can grab that and print it out. So let's take a look and see what it does. So if we're going to run this AI demo, hopefully it works. The sky usually appears blue during the day due to the blobbity blobbity blobbity. Pretty cool, right? So that came from ChatGPT, essentially. All right. Now, the one thing that did is that went out and it got the answer and waited until it received the whole answer before it printed anything to the screen. Sometimes you may not want to do that because sometimes it may take a little while for some of these responses to come back. Depending on how complex the question is and whatnot, it may take a little while for that to come back. So what we can do is we can come into here and we can do this complete streaming async. And what that does is that as soon as it's ready to go, it's going to start streaming the content back. So if we run this now, I wish, it doesn't matter. You can see that now it's streaming the answer back. Super cool, right? Now, this was with ChatGPT, but let's say that we don't want to use ChatGPT. We want to use some free, let's say we're super cheap like me, and we want to use a free large language model such as Ollama. All we need to do there is we then need to create a new Ollama chat client. So the only piece of code that we're changing is the type of chat client that we're going to create. And I've installed Ollama 3.2. I actually installed Llama 3.3. Have any of you used Ollama before?
No, I was scared it was going to light my computer on fire.
Okay, so Llama 3.3 is the first one I tried. It's like 48 gig. And then I went to run it and it said, oh, I'm sorry, you only have 37 gigabytes of memory free. You need at least 48 gigabytes free. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do a Llama 3.3. So we did a Llama 3.2, much smaller. I mean, it's itty bitty. So anyway, so we're going to do Llama 3.2. And it's.
You still have to have a decent GPU?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I've got a pretty good one in here, and it hasn't been a problem. And this is just something that you go to the ollama.com and you can just download these different models and install them right on your machine, and then it just runs it at this local host. And I don't think this is going to work because I think I have to run the model. Let me see. So if we go ahead and run this demo with the Ollama chat client, let's see what it does.
When I did my brown bag.
Oh, there you go.
I thought about doing it. I was like,
Yeah. Well, in 3.2, you'd probably be fine with. It was 3.3 that was a huge issue. But there you go. So that's the answer from Olam, and you can see that it's quite a bit different answer, but this is a completely free LLM, whereas OpenAI, you have to pay for tokens and stuff like that. And there's a lot more that you can do. We're not going to get into real depth on this, but you can actually augment the data that the AI is going to use, so that, because most LLMs, well, all LLMs are trained on a set of data, right? What that means is that they're trained up to a certain point, and that's where they're trained up to. So if you need data that's newer than that, or maybe even specific to your use case, which probably you are going to want, like you want to give me a summary of all the sales of pens we had last year, right? If it doesn't have access to your data, then it's not going to know anything about that. And so with this, you have the ability to augment the data. So there's the acronym RAG. Does anybody know what RAG? So RAG is a common thing in AI. It's retrieval, augmentation, and then generation. So the retrieval, it's going to go out and get whatever it needs. The augmentation is you're augmenting it with your own data. It's going to combine that, and then it's going to generate a response. And with the Microsoft extensions.ai, you can augment your data in there. And there's another one called semantic kernel that is actually a little bit broader and a little bit more powerful, I think. But I haven't played with semantic kernel too much. It's another NuGet package that you can just throw right in for using AI. And Aspire actually has some integrations for OpenAI as well, so that you can include those in your Aspire. Any questions on this stuff? AI stuff?
I think that's super cool.
It is super cool. It is super cool. And like I said, I'm building an app. I just built a proof of concept today for a client. So the cool thing is I'm actually going to get to use it in a production scenario. So I'm excited about that. All right, next, .NET Aspire. So .NET Aspire is a heavily opinionated framework for building and deploying apps to the cloud, okay? It handles a lot of your service discovery. It handles a lot of your containerization. It handles all kinds of stuff for you. And it provides a really cool dashboard for you to look at. And we're going to take a look at an Aspire app here. So there's a couple of things that .NET 9 brings to us. It gives us an improved dashboard, and we'll take a look at the dashboard. It gives us the possibility for persistent containers. So when you're running an Aspire app and you fire up the Aspire app, it's going to spin up a bunch of containers. It's going to your microservices, your app itself, you know, a database, Redis, whatever you have defined in your Aspire app, it's going to spin up all those containers. But then when you close your app, it gets rid of them all and throws them all away. So the next time you spin it up, it's going to take a minute to spin them all back up again. The idea of persistent containers is that it will keep those containers between runs so that you don't have to spin them up and down all the time. It also added the ability to wait for dependencies, and we'll take a look at what that means. We've got a lot of integrations. Azure Functions is going to be an integration. It's in preview right now. Because right now, for all of your apps, like your web apps, your web APIs, all that kind of stuff, it deploys them into Azure Container Apps by default. So this will, in preview now, they're looking at Azure Functions and Azure Web Apps, and there's some community stuff to do static web apps and stuff like that, so that you can define how you want these things deployed in your code itself. Azure Resource Customization. So before, you deploy it and you'd get a container, and there's not a lot you could do to that container from inside your code. Now you can actually go into the code, you can tell it, you know what, I want this to be able to scale down to 0, or I want this to scale up to 10. I want it to have this CPU and stuff like that. And so that was added in .NET 9. And then support for Azure Functions is in preview. So let's take a look at .NET Aspire. So when you get a .NET Aspire app, so it's actually a template in Visual Studio. It's there's a couple of them. There's the Aspire Starter app, there's the app host, there's the service defaults, and then there's just an empty Aspire app. I created this from the Aspire starter app. And essentially what it does is it gives you your typical, so there's extra stuff that I've thrown in here, but it gives you your typical web app. And by default, it creates a Blazor application here. And then it creates an API service. So those are the two that you would have in pretty much any project, right? You got your web app and you got your API on the back end. What Aspire does is it adds this app host and this service defaults project. And then what you do is you run the app host project. The app host then spins up your other applications and monitors them and manages them and makes it really easy for troubleshooting and all kinds of stuff like that. And so let's actually run it and I'll show you what happens. So when you run this, again, you're running the app host project. So we'll run this. And I need to start Docker. You do have to be running Docker for this. So let me do that really quick. So you can see that these failed.
Well, so if you start Docker now without restarting it, will they pick up on that?
No. No. But now I got Docker running, so we'll try this again. So we're gonna, oh, not that one. We're gonna run this guy. So this is what it fires up. And you can see things are popping up. That's as these containers get started, they're gonna be popping up. Now, I have this Aspire SQL server. It says it's unhealthy right now. The reason for that is it takes a minute to spin up a SQL container, right? Because this is a SQL container running on my machine. So not only is it spinning it up, but I'm running my migrations, creating the database, all that kind of stuff. So that's why it was healthy there for a second. Now you'll see that they're all running. So I've got a Aspire SQL server, and this is running the Azure SQL Edge image, which is essentially Azure SQL in a container. So what we're doing is we're able to run our entire application completely locally, exactly as it would be running up in Azure. So we have our cache. So I got a Redis container in here as well. We've got our cache commander. So if we click on that, this is the Redis cache commander. And you can come in here and look at all of your Redis cache and all that kind of stuff. Then here's our API service, and then here's our web front end. So you're like, well, how do I look at my web app? I want to go look at my web app and see what it's doing. So all you need to do is just come in here and click on this link over here, and there it pops up your web app for you. And this is connected to the weather service in the back end, because this is coming from the API. But the cool thing about it is now we can come back here and we can go look at the console for that web app. So this is the console for the web app. We can go look at all of the logs for every single one of our containers right here inside of this, this dashboard. So here, and we can even go in to look at traces. And so you can see that I did a get to the weather endpoint. So it used the web front end, and then it called that API service, and it took 1.6 seconds. And if I click on that, it'll give me all the information about everything that it did in that call. So this is really powerful. And the cool thing is that when you deploy this into Azure, you actually get this dashboard as well in Azure Container Apps. And we'll go take a look at that here in just a second. Now you're asking yourself, well, that's great. You get a dashboard, but so what? But let's go take a look at how we set this up. So what you do is you go into your app host and you go into the program.cs, and here is where you're going to define all of the pieces of your application. So you can see that I've got this as, I'm adding an Azure SQL Server. And so this run as container, what that means is that when you're running locally, it's going to spin up a container on your local machine. But when you deploy this out to Azure, it's going to instantiate an instance of an Azure SQL Server in Azure for your application to use. Without any code change. This run as container it can tell that you're running local or not local, and it without any code change, it'll point to the right place. So we're setting this variable called DB to this Azure SQL Server. We're setting a variable called Redis to an instance of Redis. Then all we need to do is we add our API service. So we point to this project here, which is our API service project. We say with reference DB. So what that means is we don't have to remember the connection string. Aspire is going to take care of finding that database and hooking everything up for us. Okay. We do this wait for DB because I don't want to start this service until the database is completely up and ready. So this is one of the new things that .NET 9 brought to us. So then go ahead.
So with the database, scroll up just a little bit. I didn't want to throw off your group, but
no, sure.
So you on line 6 it says run as container, and then you give it the name of the image.
Yeah.
Does that default to latest, or could you put the
yes,
colon and then
you could. And if you don't put that in there, then this particular one will default as SQL Server 2022 latest. But I wanted to use the Azure SQL Edge in this case, just because. Now the other thing, so Azure SQL Server is still, I believe it's in preview. I don't think it's released yet. But what you can do is if you do add SQL Server, then one of the things that you can do is you can say, with lifetime, and then you can say container lifetime dot persistent. And what that means is that won't shut down that container when you run this. It'll fire it up the first time and then not get rid of it again.
With persistent containers, you have to have a storage location outside of your.
You set up a volume mount. Now, if you have a persistent container, then it would keep the data in there because the container is going to keep running. Now, if you tear the container down, then you lose everything. Right?
So where do you define the storage?
You would do that in here as well. You would set up the volume mounts in here as well. Now, typically, what you could do as well is you can pass in a connection string because you may already have a database that you're going to use. You may not want this to create a new database when you deploy this to Azure, right? You've got a database that you have to use, so you can pass in a connection string that it will use rather than creating a new database. So when you're local, right, it'll spin up one, run your migrations, do your seeding, whatever you have. When you deploy it, it's going to use the connection string that you pass in to do that. So then we have our web front end, and we're going to reference the API service in our web front end. One of the problems that we have a lot of times with, calling APIs is, well, what's the URL? How do I call that API? What do I do there? And so this will take care of that service discovery for you. And then I have this project that I put in here for a migration service to run my migrations, create the database, and all that kind of stuff. So if we go into our web front end then, and we go into the API client, well, let's see, go into the program. So you'll notice here that we are adding an HTTP client right here with the weather API client, and here's our base address. So this is our base address. We're passing in this word API service because that's what we called it in our app host. So now this is going to know, as we deploy this as a package, it's going to know where API service is. We don't have to, because if you've ever looked at the URLs for container apps, they're nasty, right? They're, I don't know, fluffy puppy, whatever, IO, la, 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 whatever. This means that we don't care what that is. We'll just put that in here, and Aspire will take care of the service discovery for us. So it's really nice that way.
So the HTTPS plus, so either one would be called?
That's right, but putting HTTPS first means that it's preferred. So, but yes, you could, that means you could call it with both.
And the API service, you have the option when you configure it to enforce HTTPS?
Yeah, and that would be something that you would do on the container itself, the container app itself. But yeah, and again, that's one of the nice things about .NET 9 is it gave you the ability to configure a lot of that. Because you can come into here. So there's a new CLI called the Azure Developer CLI. It's AZD. I would recommend getting familiar with that. But one of the things that it can do is you can come in here and you can do an AZD up at the command line in your app host folder, and it will deploy the entire thing up into Azure for you. Just completely behind the scenes, it creates all the bicep, it does all that stuff, and then it will deploy that up for you. And then you can do an AZD down, and it will tear it all back down for you as well. But if you want to see what it's going to do, there's another command called AZD infra synth. And what that does is that will generate all the YAML and bicep and then put it in some folders for you to go look at. So here's a YAML file for the service. And then there's bicep files in different places. But that AZD infra synth will generate that so that you can go look at it and modify it if you need to. And you can also build pipelines around all of this in Azure DevOps. So I'll show you how that looks too. Let me see if I can find it. Give me just 1 second.
Aspire in DevOps is something I've been really curious about because I haven't tried it.
Yeah. I'll show you how it works right now. Okay, so this is the Azure DevOps project for that project. So if we go into pipelines, I've got this STG Aspire pipeline right here. And if we go edit that, so you'll see that we have different stages, so we can deploy to different stages. We're going to do Ubuntu latest. We're going to use .NET 9. So when I did this pipeline, I don't know if it's fixed now yet or not, but the Azure build agents did not support .NET 9. They only supported .NET 8. So I had to put this step in for it to download and use .NET 9. And then we have to install AZD. So AZD is that Azure Developer command line. Then we config AZD to use the Azure authentication of the Azure DevOps pipeline. And then we need to install the Aspire workload. So it's a .NET workload. Then we provision the infrastructure. So there's an AZD provision. And what that does is that's going to go out and create all of the Azure resources that we need for this application. And then we're going to do an AZD deploy. So the AZD up does a provision and a deploy as all together. But in here, I decided to make them separate. So we have the AZD provision and then the AZD deploy. And then I'm doing some stuff here to configure some environment variables and whatnot. But that's how you do a pipeline. And then for stage, you do the same thing, except you pass in the environment of staging. Yeah. So any questions about that? So right now for STG, I'm building that technology framework. It does all of this. This was actually all created by that. So then what we get.
Explain to me the stages. I've never used that.
Yeah, so that's okay. So stages in Azure DevOps allow you to do a lot of really neat things. One of them is to do gated deployments, right? So let's say that you have an application that you want to send to dev, and then you want to send it to UAT, and then you want to send it to production. You don't want to do all of those all at once. You want to stop it at UAT and make somebody go in and approve it to go up to UAT. You do that with environments, okay? And in Azure DevOps, doing stages is what allows you to do that. So you'll notice here in this stage, we have the environment is dev. And then down here, the environment is stage, right? So if we go look at an execution of this guy, you'll see that we have a deploy to dev stage and a deploy to stage stage. It's waiting because permission is needed. And so I need to go in here and give permission to that stage to deploy. And the way that you do that is you give the environment in the stage, but then you have to go into here and set up an environment. So here's my stage environment. and then we can come in here and say, we require an approval, and it has to be approved by Troy. Now, any stage that we set to the environment stage has to be approved by me before it gets moved up. And you can do all kinds of stuff. So you can do like you can invoke an Azure function. So it would invoke the Azure function, and if it gets back true, then it gets to deploy to the next stage. You can invoke any REST API. You can do, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that you can do as a gate to that deployment.
I remember seeing one where you could integrate DocuSign.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to digitally sign the document before it could go out.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of really cool stuff. What I use it for mainly is to have a gated deployment where somebody has to approve going to that next stage. So let's go back over here, and I'll show you what it creates for that, what Aspire created here. So this is the stuff that was created through that .NET Aspire. So you see I've got my API service. It created a container registry, because these are all container apps. It created my SQL server. So here's my database and server. Now, you got to be really careful, because by default, oh crap, and I hope I didn't screw this up. By default, it puts it up to a $250 a month database. Okay, and I did switch this. You can change that. And I would recommend doing that at least for your dev databases, right? But here's our container apps environment. Here it created a managed identity for us so that we can, call out to other stuff. And then here's our web front end as a container app. So this is all the stuff that it created for us just by doing that AZD provision and that AZD deploy. So pretty cool stuff. I think that one of our other members is going to do a full presentation on .NET Aspire. So I don't want to steal all of his thunder, but
That'll be coming up.
yeah, yep, that'll be coming up in the next couple of months. Very cool. Like I said, I'm converted. I love .NET Aspire, and you can add. I mean, I'll show you one other thing. You can actually, so you can add .NET Aspire to any .NET app that you have. Right? You can just right-click and say Add Aspire Orchestration, and it will create the app host. It'll create the service defaults. It'll do all of that. It'll set up, kind of like now you can do Docker orchestration, right? And it'll create the Docker Compose and all that kind of stuff. This does the same thing except with .NET Aspire. So if you have Visual Studio, you can come into here and you can right-click on your solution, and you can say Add. Or sorry, well, none of these projects are valuable for that, so never mind. But you could do add, and then there's going to be a .NET Aspire orchestration in here. But I've already got it, so anyway. So you can add it to anything you want, and it will create these for you. Now, we saw .NET Aspire using .NET applications. We can also do this using other applications. So for instance, this one here, this web app is a React application. And you can add that using this add npm app. You can just point it to whatever React application you want, or Angular, or Vue, and it will incorporate that into your Aspire workload as well. And it'll show up in the dashboard, it'll create the container for it, and it'll also do the service discovery and all that kind of stuff. It's really cool. And so, yeah, so that's kind of a cool thing. And there's all kinds of integrations that you can add in here. Like I said, there's an open API one where you can integrate that and have Aspire manage all that for you. So really cool stuff. I would highly recommend digging into Aspire because it's fun. All right. Any other questions on Aspire?
Can you use that Aspire with the
Yes, you can, but
it doesn't have all the cool.
it doesn't have all the cool features. So .NET Aspire version 8.2 is the one that works with .NET 8. But if you want some of these other things, you have to upgrade to .NET 9 and use Aspire 9. So, and I don't think Aspire 9 will work with .NET 8. I haven't tried it, but I don't think it will. All right. Performance improvements. Let's just take a look at this a little bit. So, uses less memory. It's faster. It does better I/O, better thread efficiency. There's one thing that it does that I really liked. It allows you to do AOT compilation. So that's really handy if you're doing serverless applications, right? So for instance, Azure Functions. One of the big problems with Azure Functions is cold starts, right? I mean, some Azure Functions can take quite a while to start up. In fact, I wrote an Azure function that I use as an API connector for my ADB2C, so that when somebody logs in, it calls this Azure function, it'll go get their roles out of the database, add that to the token, and then that token gets passed back. And so that the database roles are then part of the token, right? Problem is that once that function went to sleep, it was timing out from that API connector call. So logins were failing. So there's a couple things that you can do. I changed it to AOT compilation, and I changed the Azure function to a 64-bit function instead of a 32-bit. So if you have Azure Functions, I would recommend doing that because that speeds it up immensely. And after that, I mean, it was quick. It spun up really quick, and so I didn't have any timeouts after that. So that's one of the things is AOT compilation. So these are some of the things. So we have AOT compilation. We have improved garbage collection, threading enhancements, optimized link queries. So .NET 9 really improved some of the link operations. I mean, a huge amount. I can't even tell you how much, but made some of these things really, really fast. Like, oh gosh, I can't even remember any of the ones there. Well, I guess the order by, I think, is a lot faster. And so if you use link, like Entity Framework, then you're going to get a huge performance improvement just by upgrading to .NET 9. Without touching anything else in your app, if you just upgrade to .NET 9, your link queries are going to be much faster. Better network performance. See, this is that graph I got. So anyway, so there's a lot of performance improvement in .NET 9. Let's see what this one is. Anything we care about here? No, not really. Oh, yeah, if you guys ever need to do any benchmarks, this library called benchmark.net is a really cool way to do it. If you ever need to do anything, you can actually have it through configuration. You can say run this in .NET 8 and .NET 9 and compare the two. And then it'll print out, you know, the different speeds of both. It's really cool. If you ever need to do any benchmarking of your code, it's a really powerful way to do that. All right. Any questions on that? No? Okay. Well, I've already shown you all the demos, so that's pretty much all I've got. We're done pretty early today. What do you guys think of .NET 9? Something you're gonna? Are you using it at all, Dallin? Oh, it's your client. Yeah. Yeah.
I like it. It's faster. Cooling is better.
Yeah. And it's just sexier, right? I mean, every time a new .NET comes out, you got to use it, right? But like Doug said, you know, corporations a lot of times don't want to. So what's the concern with your company?
Well, we have our application, we still have some .NET framework for 8.
Oh yeah.
And we just barely got to .NET 6. So, you know, to get some of that stuff, we're moving a lot of our stuff into NuGet packages, you know, the stuff that was in this stuff, that NuGet packages, and using the .NET 2.0.
Oh, the .NET standard.
Yeah.
Standard, yeah.
So that both are.
Yeah.
You have some portals that we're using. their web application, basically. Some of those common functions between the things.
So are you doing new development in .NET 6? Why are you doing .NET 6 instead of 8? Just because that's what
That's what we had.
that's what you've been doing. Nice.
We just barely got to 6.
And
I
I
don't
mean,
know what 6 was quite a big upgrade.
it was. It
And
was.
I don't know what it would take to get to 8 or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, a new release every year, it's a little hard to keep up with. Especially if you're in production, you're running enterprise applications, it's a little hard to keep up with. Now, typically from .NET 6 on, you should be able to just go change the framework and everything should work, right? There are some breaking changes, but the reality is even if you do that, you're still not doing it the best way for that framework, right? So like in .NET 6, the way that you did the program.cs, I'm pretty sure that they still used a startup.cs, right? You don't do that anymore. Everything's done in program.cs now. And so you can upgrade to .NET 9, but you're still doing it the old way, which works. It's just, and it's impossible really to refactor your code every year to be the latest and greatest. So it's, I guess, the reality of being a developer. So.
There's 2 comments on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
The person, loading user, said it looks, referring to this, it looks super cool, especially the link queries for us with shitty.
I happen to know who loading user is.
And then Dave Watson said it looks awesome.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. And I mean, if your company or anything needs help with any of this stuff, that's what STG is for. So feel free to reach out to STG if you have any questions. Reach out to me personally, especially loading username, if you want to reach out to me personally. That's my son, just in case anybody was wondering. But yeah, so that's what STG is for. We're here to help in any way that we can. So yeah, but thank you for your time. And we are going to do this again next month. So everybody have a Merry Christmas. All right. Thanks, guys. I'm going to cancel the YouTube stream.
There was one more comment. Sean Anderson said, thanks, Troy.
Oh, I know Sean too. Cool. Thanks, Sean. All right. Let me end the